students. I am Dr. Deepa and I am a professor in the Department of Anatomy, presently heading the Department of Anatomy, and I will be telling you very interesting facts about the development of blood vessels, because usually we talk about blood vessels which form a very important part of the circulatory system. But have you ever thought of how they develop? Because this is quite interesting when we actually go and we start with development of how a blood vessel initially arises from a single cell and how it proceeds. So, this series of lectures will actually be taken in 3 parts: development of blood vessels, and starting with part 1, in this I will be briefly discussing as to how generally blood vessels develop. Then we will move to development of blood vessels, particularly of the head and neck region, as the series proceeds. So, let us start with the development of blood vessels part 1, which is an overview of development of blood vessels. Now, as you all know, before we begin any session, we must also know clearly the objective of the session. So, your competency being covered here is AN 25.6, and the objective, specific objective of this session is that at the end of the session, the phase 1 student must be able to describe the development of aortic arch arteries correctly. So, why I have kept this particular objective? Because this is what you will achieve at the end of this series of lectures. So, to begin with, in this particular session, we will start with the introductory part. So, starting from the overview, see, blood vessels in the body, as we all know, there are 3 germ layers: ectoderm, endoderm and mesoderm. Blood vessels, remember, will always develop from mesoderm. This is point 1 which is to be remembered. So, they are mesodermal in origin. And it is very interesting to know that there are 2 processes by which they develop. The first one being vasculogenesis. So, as of now we have been loosely using the terms vasculo, angio, but now you will know the difference between them. Like vasculogenesis, we know there is mesenchyme. When the fetus is developing, there is preliminary tissue which is mesenchyme, and we can say it forms connective tissue. So, in the connective tissue there are different types of cells, and one of them are angioblastic cells or angioblasts. So, angioblasts are the one which will give rise to a new vessel, and this process by which a new vessel is formed from angioblast cells, the very beginning step, this is known as vasculogenesis. So, we can say it is the beginning of development of any blood vessel. So, this process of vasculogenesis is new vessel formation from angioblast cells. Now, once a small vessel or the preliminary framework of a vessel has been formed by the process of vasculogenesis, we will proceed to the next step, the step of angiogenesis. So, as we all know that blood vessels usually have branches. So, how do these branches arise? So, once when the main trunk has formed, this angiogenesis process is the process of new vessels sprouting from existing vessels. So, I think these 2 terms are clear now. The very first step is vasculogenesis, where a new vessel will be formed from angioblastic cells, and the next step is angiogenesis, where new vessels will sprout from this framework now, from the existing vessels. So, this figure slightly tells you what we were talking about till now. So, in the upper part we can see vasculogenesis. We can see very small angioblastic cells just lying here and there randomly. Then they organize themselves and they get symmetrically arranged, somewhere resembling a blood vessel. This process is vasculogenesis. In the next step, primarily we can see angiogenesis is taking place. That means a blood vessel is already formed and branches are sprouting out, and finally we can see the bigger artery with branches, lot of branches. And in the third, we can see angiogenesis has already occurred, vasculogenesis is also occurring. So, this process actually continues in various combinations throughout the body, and finally we have the blood vessels in our body. So, roughly now we know that all blood vessels in the body arise by the process of angiogenesis and vasculogenesis. Now we move to from the general terminology, now we move to the specific arteries. We assume that arteries are now forming in different parts of the body. So, all the arteries of the body, they develop from two main sources. First, we talk about the head and neck region, and then we talk about the arteries of the remaining part of the body. So, if we say for the head and neck region, these arteries are specifically known as the pharyngeal arch arteries, or we call them as aortic arches. So, aortic arches are nothing but pharyngeal arch arteries, and they supply all the regions of the head and neck. Other arteries of the body, they will form from the dorsal aorta. So, how do we summarize? We say that the arteries of the head and neck region, they develop from the pharyngeal arch arteries or the aortic arches, and the arteries of remaining part of the body, they develop from the dorsal aorta. And how do they develop? Process of vasculogenesis and angiogenesis, it continues throughout the body in varying combinations. So, let us move to first pharyngeal arch arteries, because this is our point focus as we have talked about in the competency also. So, first arteries to form are the right and left primitive aorta. So, in this figure, if you have a look at the two pink arteries on the left and the right sides, they are actually the right and the left primitive aortae, and these can be divided. Each of them can be divided into the dorsal aorta. Now, focus on this oval outline. This part of each artery will be known as the dorsal aorta. Then we move to the ventral aorta. So, dorsal aorta is placed dorsally and ventral aorta are placed ventrally. So, it is in this figure, actually we are seeing it as a two-dimensional thing, but actually it is occurring in three dimension. So, dorsal aorta, ventral aorta, and the part which is connecting them is the first aortic arch artery. So, these are the two first arteries, the left, right and the left primitive aorta, divided into three parts: dorsal aorta, ventral aorta, and first aortic arch artery. Now, let us see what happens further. In this figure, we can see some part of the two ventral aortae. Now, we are focusing only on the ventral aortae. Some part of the two ventral aortae, they fuse to form the aortic sac. So, focus on the arrow or the outline now. You will be able to understand this arrow is showing that part of the ventral aortae which have fused together, and this part will be now known as the aortic sac, and the orange part or the brown part that you see in this figure is actually the heart tube. So, this aortic sac will join the heart tube. Now, remaining unfused part, this was only the initial fused part. The remaining unfused part will form the right and the left horns of the aortic sac. So, just have a look at the upper arrow on one side. This is showing the right horn, and similarly we have the left horn on the other side. So, right and left horns of the aortic sac are formed by the unfused parts. Now, later on what happens? Till now we had only one artery, first aortic arch artery, but now after the right and left horns have formed, aortic sac will give rise to 6 pairs of aortic arch arteries. So, initially it was only one, but now 6 pairs of aortic arch arteries will arise, because we very well know that there are initially to begin with 6 pharyngeal arches. So, each arch will be supplied by an aortic arch artery. So, each artery supplies one arch, but as we know, the 5th pharyngeal arch disappears as soon as it appears. So, the 5th artery will also disappear as soon as it appears. So, finally, we have only 5 pharyngeal arches and 5 pharyngeal arch arteries. So, now here this arrow shows how initially we had only one, but now we can see there are 5 in this figure because the 6th one has disappeared. And if we have a look at the arch arteries, the counting, if you focus on the counting of these, we can see there is first arch artery, there is second arch artery, third arch artery, fourth arch artery, but the 5th one is missing. So, the 5th is the one which disappears, and then we have the 6th arch artery. So, finally, we have 5 of them because the 5th one has disappeared. So, these are the same thing happens on each side, opposite side also. Now, in the next step, so here we are now sure that we have finally remaining 5 arch arteries numbered as 1, 2, 3, 4 and 6. That is what this figure is showing. Now focus on the dorsal aorta part. See, the dorsal aorta, it remains separate only in the region of arch arteries. So initially we can see that it was separate throughout, but later on the dorsal aorta will remain separate only in the region of arch arteries, but elsewhere they will fuse to form a single aorta. So we can see in the upper image there are 2 dorsal aortae, but in the lower one the 2 dorsal aortae have fused to form a single dorsal aorta. So this will be the next step. So here we end with the introductory session. Until now we have seen how generally blood vessels form, then we went to how other arteries are formed in the body, how the head and neck arteries are formed, and now we are focusing only on the head and neck part. In that also, till now we have covered that there are 5 arch arteries. So in the next session we will move to other details of the same series. So thank you very much, and I end my session here. We will meet in the other session in the next video.